Hi, everyone.
Angeli.
Hello, hello.
Charlie's outside, honey, by the way. Charlie is outside.
So Vicky said that a number of people had to update to version 5 of Zoom before the call, so they might be a little delayed.
Yeah, that's helpful. I kept getting prompted to do that, and I kept declining it until at one point Zoom would not launch. It's like it's not like your phone where it lets you go as long as you want.
The world we live in these days.
Having trouble, you guys, with my Zoom. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it sounds like a common theme. Some folks are saying they had to update it to get on.
Got it.
Good afternoon. Today is Blackout Tuesday, an initiative that originated in the music industry to raise awareness of the killings of George Floyd and too many others. So maybe it's ironic that today, and for a couple days now, I've been thinking about the old Sam Cooke song, "A Change Is Gonna Come." I've been to the local peaceful protests. I've also watched the violence on the screens, both those that ignited the peaceful protests in the first place, the police violence, and the violence that followed those protests. I've been asked if I was going to make a statement on behalf of the association. I was going to post it on our website or send out an email or social media, and I've declined all of those. I don't want to make statements that put an easy and neat pin in things and move on. I want to put in the work to change things in whatever meaningful ways I can. Whatever I think needs to change in communities that are bursting with frustration and outrage right now, I want to help do that. I know that one injustice for sure has been the inequality in education, something, of course, that we are all working on every day. Most everyone on this phone longer than I have, except, of course, to count my own children in my own life. And when I'm thinking about the change and the injustices and all of the things that people are fighting for in the communities, and I think about statements, I think that what I can say is that you can draw a straight line from the inequalities, the unequal access, the deprivation of quality of education that happens in our cities across the state. You can draw a straight line from there to most, if not all, of the other injustices people are now fighting about, protesting, demanding for change in the streets, on social media, on websites across the state and across this country. So maybe that's my statement, right? No education equality, no equal opportunity, no justice, no peace. I want to extend a special invitation, take this time right now to extend a special invitation to educators and collaborators of color to join me, call me, let's talk about what we can do to actually affect change, and I am extending this to educators and collaborators of color specifically. It's time to talk about race again and again and again, and about what we can do again and again and again, and how it uniquely impacts our communities again and again and again. And I want to discuss ideas, what we can do again to affect change, and I want to hear from allies too. Call me, email me. You can even put it in the chat right now. Let's do something so that change ain't going to come, that it's here. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I'm joined today by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSEG, Angeli Matos, Executive Director, Policy and Operations at New York City Department of Education, Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office, and Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. Before we jump to hear from our authorizers today, I want to let you know that school leaders should have received an invitation to share with their parents to join a parent forum, which will have its first meeting on Wednesday, that's tomorrow. The goal is to give parents a place to connect with each other authentically and to share experiences and resources. If you didn't receive the invitation and materials to share with your school's parents, please email Ashara on our team at abaker@npicharters.net. Please also join us on Thursday for our deep dive webinar this week, which will feature Springboard Collaborative, discussing their strategy of engaging and supporting parents to advance their child's literacy, including some summer resources for schools, both more important now than ever. I also want to give a quick announcement on the governor's announcement that summer camps are allowed to open on June 29th. Stay tuned for more from us on that. Now we will turn it over to our authorizers. David, Susie, and Aaron, would you like to share an update before we turn to our questions?
Yumika, thank you so much for saying that and for those sentiments. I couldn't do any of the situation justice, and I would just wholeheartedly agree and support what you said. We're all in this to break the vicious cycle of poverty, to create better opportunities for students in communities that historically don't have these opportunities. And I would double down on saying that now more than ever, we need strong leadership. We need focus on the addressing the needs of students, both academically as well as social emotionally. And so we know that our school leaders from across the state are up for that challenge. I think that hand in hand with the strong education is making your voices heard, whether that's through advocacy, but also at the ballot box. Many of you, particularly, I don't think our New York City friends, but many of you this week have received your absentee ballots for school board elections, and it is so crucial that you and your schools and your parents have a voice in those elections. And the barrier now to participation is so low and the stakes are so high that I encourage you also to think about those meaningful choices, not only on whether or not you're voting up or down your school's budget, but also the people on those ballots who are running to represent your children and your parents on school boards. School boards don't just represent the students who attend school in the district schools. They represent, or they should represent, all children. And so, I would plead with you, please make sure that you vote and make sure that you're making a meaningful choice when you do vote. In terms of updates, we are continuing to put out resources for schools. We have a remote monitoring and an oversight plan that we have up on our website. And actually this week we just updated it. We want schools to now shift from, continue to implement your continuity of learning plans, but also think about how you can meaningfully close out the school year. So that means not only celebrating the work that your students have been doing, whether it's through graduations or end of year ceremonies, stepping up ceremonies, but also how you can close out the year academically. And so we've added an appendix, it's actually on page 19 of that document, recommendations for collecting data during distance learning and how you can see what your students have learned as you've been engaging in your continuity of learning plans, but how you think about preparing for next academic year. We know that the state, through the governor's office, will be issuing further guidance on what next year might look like in June, this month, being June 2nd, but also that we're going to formally be asking you for reopening plans in July. I don't have any information on the details just yet, and I know that that's frustrating. I know that's something that you've heard over the now almost 3 months that we've been doing this, but as soon as we have information, we will convey that to you. But we want you to be at the forefront of thought leaders in this area. What will school look like if we're there in person? If we're there half in person and half remotely, or if we're there completely remotely, and to have those contingencies, just like you have contingencies for your budget. But as always, we're building this plane as we're flying it, just like you. And so please reach out if you have any questions or comments or concerns. And with that, I'll hand it over to my fellow authorizers.
Okay, Erin, I'm trying to use wait time. I'll dive in.
Thank you, Susie.
Yep, you go ahead.
Sorry, I'm so slow on this unmuting. No, I appreciate it. And thank you so much, Yumika, for that introduction. And thank you, David, for outlining what you're doing with your schools. We don't have many updates to add beyond what we know all of our schools are already doing, thinking about next year, closing out this year. So nothing more to add, but just knowing that we see your hard work. And we're looking forward to continuing this conversation as we close out this year and look ahead to next.
I just want to add my thanks also to your eloquence, Yumika. You are, as are many of folks on this webinar, one of the folks that makes me smarter and makes the Institute smarter about how we can do even better at this work in terms of supporting each and every one of you that's on this call. But I speak to all of the building leaders and network leaders and other folks who, I say this a lot, who are grabbed by the belly every morning and drug out of bed because we care so much about the children and families that choose our schools. And we've talked at the Institute a little bit this week about how these times, these emotions, and these conversations are messy, but they are extraordinarily heartfelt. And Yumika, you really underscored that for me. So thank you. And thanks to everybody else that's joining us today. Pivoting to the real work of continuing to support our kiddos. I actually even see in the chat, somebody's got a draft plan that they want to send to us. And I continue to thank each of the leaders that reach out, some in small groups, some individually, to kind of run things by me or folks at the Institute in terms of the scenarios that you're planning for. David described what potential eventualities may be. Again, it's probably going to be messy on the way there, but that's okay. I don't know a better group of folks that I'm going to get a little messy with to do good things for children. So please feel free to continue those emails, those phone calls. The smaller groups are really super helpful to me, because I can kind of think about you in smaller chunks than the big webinars. As pieces of this become clearer, I'm going to hope that Yumika and her team will kind of help us talk a little bit about what we're seeing as best practices across all of the schools. And again, right now, those really are, you know, understanding the limitations of what full-time return to bricks and mortar school looks like, and helping us enumerate those really clearly for everybody that we're talking to, as well as how to put the best foot forward in terms of planning for blended and remote learning. So thanks to all of you. And I'll hand it back to you, Yumika.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. We have a couple questions that I know, again, you may not have the clear answers to, but we always want to ask them, put it out there, see what the larger implications are, and then if we need to, we'll follow up with folks as more information comes clear. So first is, if the state allows schools to physically open in the fall using CDC guidelines for PPE and social distancing, will parents be able to opt out their children from attendance? And if they do, what obligations will a school have to provide them with distance learning if a school is otherwise in attendance? David, we'll start with you.
So that's a good question, and we want to be sensitive to the fears and concerns that parents have, and they're always putting the health and safety of their students first, just like we should. And I'm sure as all of you would recognize this refrain, more guidance will be forthcoming from the state. We just don't have answers to that right now. My hope is that there will be some flexibilities to ensure that vulnerable students, whether they're immunocompromised or have anxieties, that those concerns will be addressed. But we will continue to work with the executive as well as now the legislature that will be back on these very important questions.
Thank you. Erin, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, so we are looking for guidance. I think that as a best practice, so we are seeing that folks are planning for other ad hoc situations in which a student may need to receive distance learning kind of outside of any hybrid or in-person plans that you may have. For instance, in addition to the opt-outs, what if a student gets sick, or what if they have to quarantine for 10 days because of a sick family member? So while we're looking for the official guidance on responsibilities and things like that, I think that we are recommending that schools be thinking about these situations where individual students need a different situation than what may be happening in the wider school.
Okay, thank you. Susie, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I'll just underscore that, thinking about what Erin said in terms of we've learned an awful lot from you in the last couple of months, and there may be non-COVID related issues that where some provision of remote or blended learning is important and the right choice. And so we're interested in, if you're facing that, we want to help solve that problem.
Okay, thank you. My second question is a somewhat different note. Can schools be required that staff get tested before returning to the school building in August to prepare for reentry? And Erin, we'll start with you on that question.
We're definitely still looking for guidance there. I imagine that a good conversation with your legal team may be helpful, but we're still looking into that.
Okay. Susie, I see you're nodding your head. You agree with that response?
Yeah, I mean, it's an area of human resources, law that I think we all want to get the really best advice on this. And I also know so many of the leaders I've talked to, the commitment of staff members to each other and how to navigate if everybody raises their hand and says, yes, we'll get tested, or if there's some other potentially, personal issue that folks don't want to disclose. So again, best advice is to talk with your legal counsel to understand the most up-to-date thinking in terms of human resources, because I know you are going to support your teachers in every way you can.
Okay, great. And David, do you want to add something to that?
I mean, I would recommend that you speak to your legal counsel about that and what's permissible under employment law. I'm thinking of a fighting answer, but that's what I would advise schools to do.
Yamika, can I break protocol and speak as an advocate and not an authorizer? And just say, I'm sure that folks have already observed the role that teachers unions are playing in districts, and the perception that they are protecting the interests of teachers in some cases against the will of the decision makers in the districts. And so it really underscores the importance of having thoughtful, caring conversations and relationships with your staff now, which I'm sure that all of you do, but potentially to even understand whether there are questions and concerns about something like this now, because even if it were to be either a mandate or a desire on behalf of you as a school leader, these are the moments where people feel unsupported by their school leadership, and in particular seeing a model of support elsewhere that can raise just difficult questions.
Thanks, Anna, for adding that. The last question that we have is there updated guidance from SUNY and other authorizers on the expectations for the budget, or how they would view worst-case scenarios that schools should plan for, since the governor is publicly calling for the potential of cuts of up to 20%. Will authorizers see schools' budget as sufficiently conservative if they have a worst-case scenario of 10%, for example? And Susie, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thanks for the question. Important question, because it goes to how well we can support our families, children, and staff. So I know this is front of everyone's thinking as they're planning the actual scenarios for return to school. The templates that we did initially asked for folks to budget at their approved an authorized number. SUNY schools have a collar that lets them go a percentage above and percentage below that. And so we are still asking for that. If you have a unique situation, then reach out and we'll talk to you about your unique situation about that. Trying to exact a budget for above the exact number that's in your charter document. And in addition to that, we put a 5% COVID contingency line. And that was, I think, created what seems like long ago now. And now we understand a bit more clearly in terms of what the revenue challenge to the state has been during the New York on pause. So 10% sounds fine. I, at the Institute, have been looking, just so that you know, I have been thinking, closer to 15% and planning for that. But Maybe I'm just a little bit more negative or cautious or somewhere in between those things. So I've been looking at multiple scenario budgets that are 5, 10, and 15% challenges. But the other piece that we put in is that, which we know is reality for you every year, but certainly this year, is an opportunity to adjust your budget quarterly, because we understand that it may be that the state budget gets adjusted on a quarterly basis. And so what we want to look for, the reason we ask for budgets is to understand viability and contingency plans. That's why we do them all the time, every other year. And that's just one more thing we're looking at this year. So 10% is fine. Most of the schools, I know you're going to submit one to us, but most of the schools that I'm talking to actually have multiple budget scenarios planned as well. And I continue to say, I think that's wise advice. And, you know, when we know more about what, if any, cuts may come, we can adjust accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Erin, I'm going to turn to you now if you want to answer.
Yes, thank you. So we don't have a specific number in mind for your budget. I would say submit the budget that right now you are doing your most planning around. And we, of course, understand that things right now are in flux, and as different information comes out, we can definitely continue to have conversations about your budget. I would say that more important than like the specific numbers that you're planning on submitting different places is that you keep us in the loop on your different, the different priorities that you're weighing, the different universes. If you are looking at a scenario that maybe is not quite as conservative as you think, and you're already thinking about some significant staffing decisions or having to drop key design elements of your charter, loop us in on the early side, because I think that those conversations are going to be much more valuable than a specific Excel sheet submitted somewhere. So that's what we would ask.
Okay, great. And David, do you have thoughts on that?
So I don't have a specific number either, but to echo what Susie was saying, we would strongly recommend that your budget is a living, breathing document. It's a plan. It's not your actual. And so all good plans are usually not set in stone. So it would be a good idea to have a budget that is at the current per pupil, maybe a 5% reduction, a 10 or 15% reduction. But we also want to hear what schools are doing, not before cuts are made, particularly to key design elements and services to students. We want to hear what schools are doing to save, to conserve funds and to spend more wisely. And we're lucky here in New York that the per pupil is so high. I have a lot of friends in California, in Los Angeles, which, by the way, it is not that much cheaper to operate in Los Angeles, and their per pupil is half of what it is here in New York, and they make ends meet. And so we want to hear how you're spending wiser, and ultimately we're not willing to compromise on quality. That there's still work to be done. There's still that achievement gap to be closed, and we might need to think differently about our consultants and our procurement processes and what are the nice to haves rather than the must haves. So we would encourage you to do that. But I also think now, to echo my sentiments before, now more than ever, we need strong board leadership. We had a school that pushed back on us as to why they still need to comply with their meeting requirements and getting us the information that we need. And well, it's because we need our boards to be thinking about. If you're not a fundraising board, maybe now's the time to think about that. If you don't have partnerships with community-based organizations to extend the services you're providing to children, maybe now's the time to think about that, particularly in that social emotional area. You don't need to go at this alone. And I think lastly, we've heard more and more from schools, particularly the independent charters, that they're thinking about working together. Whereas in the past, if they, everything from, we used to buy desks and chairs alone, and now we're partnering with 5 or 6 other charters. And maybe we really want the blue chairs, but maybe we have to compromise and get some, we'll get the yellow chairs instead. And that's a real world example I've heard many times as to why schools don't collaborate. But you have the autonomy to think outside the box. Use it.
Great, thank you. Anna, do you have questions in the Q&A?
Oh, you're on mute.
Clicking too many buttons at once. I do. Before I turn to those, though, in response to what David said, I will make 2 plugs. One is that our Thursday deep dive webinar on June 18th will be about philanthropy and fundraising in this current environment. And so schools that are either have done it historically and are wondering how things have changed, or who have not historically done it, and as David is saying, want to make that a new priority and a new capacity for the school. We want to provide that resource. And then in addition, we have already brokered a relationship with Staples that offers some group purchasing power to schools in New York. And if there are other needs around things like that, we can harness the power of literally hundreds of schools in order to reduce prices and ideally increase options to both red and yellow chairs. But, you know, maybe no promises, no promises. All right, so diving into the questions in the Q&A. So one that, and I love the crowdsourcing here, that one that Donna asked and Sandy already answered, but I will pose it so that everyone hears the question and hears the answer, because we do have some folks calling in and not looking at their screen. Is the digital equity survey required for charter schools? And David, I'm going to look at you, even though you can't tell that I'm looking at you for that question. And as you answer, if you could also say a little bit about what it is, and if it is required for charter schools, where schools can find it.
So I will say Sandy is a superstar. That when that memo came out, Sandy was on that survey. So thank you, Sandy. I would say that SED is a large place, and sometimes things go out when some parts of the department don't know, and and that may or may not be the case here, but that's a survey that was sent out to all schools across the state, district, charter, non-public, special act schools, and it's to see what the digital need is across the state in terms of how much connectivity do parents have, and perhaps where should the state be putting funding into for the future, particularly as we're looking to spend some of that CARES Act money. What I would say is that it was sent to charter schools, and that's where I'll leave that. I know that all of us have a lot to balance, and the information that you provide, I'm sure, will be very valuable to people in the department. And was there another part to the question, Anna?
Where would people find it?
So it was emailed out to the charter school listserv. And if people did not get that memo, they can email me at david.frank@niced.gov, and I'd be more than happy to send it to them.
Great, thanks.
But I do think that I hear that it's a short survey, and I do think if charters are at the table for some of these conversations, I don't think that it would hurt us to continue to be so, to do so.
So let me see if I can capture the gist of what you're saying, and then turn to Susie and Aaron and see if they have any objections, which is that it behooves the communities and the families and the students that charters serve to participate, especially to the degree that they might have gaps in digital access. And so it is worthwhile, and there's no reason to not participate. David, am I capturing that? Yeah, Susie,
Absolutely.
you agree? Great.
Spot
Aaron,
on.
any reflections or feedback from your perspective?
No, nothing from our perspective.
Great.
I think it's good to participate.
Excellent. All right, so I'll ask this to everyone because I think everyone has a crystal ball that's a little bit different. And I'm going to extend on this question from Matt about, does anyone's crystal ball see any temporary changes in regards to allowing students that age out to continue into the fall term? And here's how I'll extend it. If a school knows that they have students that are on the cusp of aging out, do you have recommendations about how they should be thinking about those students?
That's a great question, and not one I have heard before. So I thank you for the question. I'll circle back around with our council. It seems to me one question is, providing the service for the student, and kind of separate from that is, or the supports for the student, separate from that is some ability then to bill for that student. So am I guessing that that's somehow embedded in the question? So I don't have an answer to that, but I'll circle back around with the Institute legal team and see what their thought on that is. And it's a great piece for us to add to this conversation as we're thinking about what will be possible in the plans that the state's going to ask for.
Thanks. David, Aaron, any additional thoughts?
No, I would echo what Susie said.
Agree. We would just need the guidance on the funding piece.
Yeah, I think that's always the tricky piece, right? Everyone can help every kid as much as they absolutely want to. And sometimes our hearts are bigger than our wallets, especially when there's a lot of students and lots of needs. David, I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a second. I know that there are lots of folks listening in that hashtag We Stand with BusSci. And I know the situation is complex, and so I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but if you had any reflections on that situation and were willing to share them briefly.
Yeah, I would echo my sentiments last week, in that I hope that this can be a space where you can ask us the tough questions. I don't think that Susie, Aaron, or I would shy away from that. The worst is I'll say I pass, but we do hope that you will ask us those tough questions. I think we always like to have our frame of reference pushed a little bit. The department's stance on Buffalo Academy of Science is clear. We made a recommendation regarding the school. To my knowledge, the department's recommendation has not changed, will not change. And so we will continue to work very closely with the Board of Regents, as well as with Buffalo Academy of Science on this issue. The regulations require us to actually bring it back to the Regents for reconsideration. And we hope to do so at the June Board of Regents meeting, which is actually on Monday. And it'll be live streamed again. But ultimately, the Regents' agenda is controlled by the Regents, not by us in the department. So we're working very hard on this matter. I've worked on very little else over the past few weeks than this, and so we want to ensure that that the Regents have all the information that they need, and we will go from there. And we will represent the information that we presented about the work they're doing in Buffalo at the next Regents meeting, opportunity permitting.
Well, thank you, David, very much. And at the risk that any of the lovely people, including Susie, who have ever served on a board that I have collaborated with, let me say, I know everyone on here has endless sympathy for working with boards. And so thank you, David, for that update, but also for your continued work. You can see in the chat, as Yomika mentioned earlier, that we will be hosting a watch party. And so if you text the number in the chat, you'll also get an update when the Regents begin to discuss charter items, which is not always entirely predictable given the agenda. All right, so last question
Yeah, and that's
before.
not my phone number.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the escalation as we start giving
That's
out
right.
David's contact information, his home address. So last question before we turn it over to New York City DOE specific topics. Question about where are we on the risk curve for opening if there's no clarity on susceptibility to the Kawasaki among school age populations, so the new and somewhat still mysterious symptoms that are impacting children who have been exposed to COVID. What if boards have to act before the state or city gives guidance? What if a school chooses to stay under distance learning? Will they be penalized financially? And I just, at the outset, before I turn this over to each of you, I think the first question that I would want to ask to frame this, do you have any expectation that schools would need to or should be making any decisions in advance of the guidance that we are anticipating from the state?
I don't think that it hurts at all to think about what you need as a school in order to open, to think about what's important to you and your community, so that you can compile that and send it to people like us here or to your elected officials or the governor, exactly. And by us here, I include you, Anna. You're my neighbor. On my screen, you're right next to me. And Susie's on my other side. You know, I think that you need to ensure that those plans are flexible, because at the end of the day, if the Department of Health says you need to do something and the governor issues an executive order saying you need to do something, then you need to do that. And no questions asked if it's the law, if it's a requirement. But unless you're having those conversations, you're not going to be part of the dialogue. And so there's two sides of the coin there. But all of you on this call, I see there's 272 attendees, have so much expertise and experience, and so it would be a travesty not to share it. And I hope that you will, and I hope you'll be part of the conversations that people are convening. And I hope that you include your families in that, and your teachers, and the community at large.
I would say I would agree with everything that David has said, but I would say if there's a decision that the board needs to make, the front of mind topic that comes up for me are potentially maybe some leasehold improvement or construction facility related decisions that your board might need to make in the next few weeks before we have some clarity around the guidance for the plans. Then that is exactly the kind of thing, when I say we are supporting, we want to support you, that is exactly the kind of thing you should pick up the phone and call us about. And we'll try to navigate that with you. Not that we have some secret behind the scene answer that we only give out if you call us directly. That's not the case. But it may be when there's a unique and individual situation, we can help navigate that. So that would be, I think, the first thing. I also don't have a secret date on my calendar for when the information is going to come from the governor's office, and David can speak to what the regents are planning on doing, if there's clarity around that. But everyone, I can only say this: everyone knows the passion, if nowhere else, that the charter sector has to understand what's going to happen, and have some certainty and clarity as soon as possible, because I spend an awful lot of my time conveying that information, to making sure that I didn't miss something, that, that there's not some secret or not so secret plans out there that we don't have yet. So just know that we're trying to drill on these answers as quickly as possible. And then, Anna, there's a second part of that question, right? Was there a second part of the question about making the decision? maybe I'm wrong.
No, I
So-
think you covered it. I think the major question was, what if boards feel compelled to make decisions before there's clear guidance?
Okay, because I just want to underscore that the one thing that, we also want to make sure that we make smart decisions around are not making a determination about being fully remote or fully bricks and mortar or something else before we understand what the rules will be in terms of counting enrollment and attendance for the year.
With that, I will hand it over to Corey and Anjali to speak to New York City DOE specific topics and questions.
Great, thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. As I think I previewed last week, there are a series of questions that we continue to receive from everyone that we do not yet have answers to. And some of that is because the DOE is awaiting guidance from the state, which, as David reminded us, is supposed to come out this month, so soon. So in the bucket of questions about operationalizing for next year, I think there's not a lot of updates right now, but there was a specific question in the chat that we'll get to in a moment. One thing I did want to bring up again and ask Anjali to talk about was access to buildings, a co-located space for end of the year closeout. This is something for a lot of co-located charters have been asking about for several weeks, if not longer, about how they can access their buildings to close out and get teachers' materials and students' materials. And this is a separate process from what currently exists of certain individuals having access to the building. So Anjali, if we could start there.
Yeah, hi Corey, hi everyone. Yeah, so the news there is that we're getting close to a final draft on this sort of guidance document, and we're hoping to issue something within the next week. So if it, C Weekly is going on Thursday, if we have it by then, we'll include it. If not, I'll look out for an addendum either on Friday or early next week.
Great. And then moving into the billing cycle, I believe that the portal has closed yesterday from billing cycle 1. Can you just give a brief update to schools about, if there's anything that needs to happen? Did schools complete enrollment into the portal, or any actions that DOE is taking right now?
Awesome. So thank you everyone for the work in submitting your invoices. We have about 90% submitted. So if you're one of those folks that, that's still working on this, please do so as soon as possible. You probably received a nudge email from us already, so you know who you are. One thing that I wanted to point out is that we are, deep in review and the review process of those invoices, and we'll be reaching out with questions around both general education enrollment and special education enrollment. One other thing, Corey, that I wanted to share with everyone, and we included the details in the C Weekly last week, but we're holding a training session for reconciliation specifically on June 16th. So please sign up. The training is from 9 to 11 in the morning, and we'll be going through some examples, some of the common questions that we get during that cycle. We still don't have guidance from SED. However, we hope that by then we have some more details on the policies that will inform that invoice.
So can we just back up? In an ordinary year, when you guys do reconciliation, can you just say broadly to the schools what that process usually looks like?
Sure. So as a quick reminder for schools, so the reconciliation cycle is meant to do two things. The first thing is supposed to capture the last 3 months of school, right? So after payment cycle 6, and any changes that may have happened with student enrollment, special education services in that time period. And the second thing it's meant to do is, there was for some reason an error that wasn't addressed throughout the year. If a student left and you didn't change the date, etc., that's your opportunity to sort of make those edits. And so I think right now there's an open question about how we're gonna collect information for the COVID period, and whether there will be, or whether there is going to be any impact on funding for that period.
And to be clear, when you say any impact, you're speaking specifically about special education, or are you speaking about any funding?
Any funding.
Okay. All right. So again, I will just remind the folks on the phone or the call that there has been executive orders that have been interpreted by SED to provide a waiver for all schools, district and charter for the years. We know we've talked about a lot on this. So we are anticipating that any guidance that DOE receives will be consistent with that. And schools should not be concerned that there will be a reconciliation outside of what Anjali is speaking about, which has been in general. There is sometimes reconciliation in the period because you do have students who move out of your school or come in. So I do think that Anjali is being asked if she can send info for the June 16th session. I believe I'm right when I say it's in Charter Weekly and probably went out last week, or if not, will go out this week. So folks should definitely join there if you are interested in hearing more about the process of reconciliation. Another question that has started to come up is enrollment, as charters are now enrolling students for school year 2021. Anjali's schools are wanting to know when they're going to have access to see the students, receive access to IEPs, all of that kind of as the system turns over for the next year. You could speak to that.
Awesome. So ATS has been open for a little bit over a month now for new student enrollment for next year. So you should be just following that guidance that we sent out, using the jump code LNIN in ATS to enroll students for next year. After you enroll students, it takes about 24 hours to see an IEP in CSIS, if they have one, of course. And one thing I want to clarify as well is that, for the kiddos, the kindergartners that were previously enrolled in pre-K that have IEPs, if those programs that they were enrolled in are DOE managed programs, then those IEPs will also be reflected in CSIS and you will have access to them. If there were not DOE managed programs, then you would have to sort of start a process with us, with the CSCs, et cetera, through your regular sort of IEP process. But I wanted to clarify that.
So moving into talking about students with disabilities, everyone has probably seen the announcement of the Related Services Fair that's happening on June 8th. But Anjali, can you just tell everyone, for new folks, and just remind everyone, what is the Related Services Fair and why is it important that charters participate in this every year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to do first a plug on the date and time and how this is being structured. So the fair is scheduled for June 8th, and it starts at 10:30 a.m. for schools. We have an earlier session at 8:30. That's for agencies only. We had an issue, by the way, if you try to register for the fair, we had an issue when it was set up last week on Thursday, but that has since been fixed. So you can go in and register now with no problem. And now you do not need a DOE email to register. So you should be fine to register with your school account, etc. And so the fair is important. It's important for schools to attend the fair because we have our related services team. So Michael Bambima and his team will give an overview of the process for the following year. And this year in particular, we're getting ready to roll out several resource documents outlining how you can be successful, right? Or set up your team for success in the process of coordinating services for students. So that's key. Additionally, you will have an opportunity to meet the primary agencies or in the point of contacts. So we'll have time set aside for June 8th from 1 to 5 and June 9th from 9 to 5 for schools to sign up with the primary agencies to talk through projections for next year, any other details that you want to discuss with them, and sort of start building that relationship with them. We're still working on those appointments, so schools can't sign up yet, but we're working to send that out as soon as possible. Corey, did I cover everything?
Yep. And then the last question is, I also noticed in C Weekly that you have a related services survey that you're asking schools to complete. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and why you're looking for people to fill it out?
Definitely. So we sent the survey out in the C Weekly last week as well. It's due June 12th. And, please complete it by then. This information is critical. It essentially asks for projections for next year by service, and it helps us in planning with the agencies to ensure that we have enough providers to fulfill the need for the following year. As you can imagine, I'll say this again, we do not anticipate being back in school at 100%. So there's going to be some teletherapy next year and some in person. So it's going to be even more critical for our numbers and our data to be tight and as updated as you have it, right? So that we can plan with the agencies to be ready for next year.
Great. And I'm seeing in the chat, someone mentioned that in the Charter Weekly last week, it did not download. So people are asking if you could send the survey again. I don't know if it's something you can actually, you or Aaron could link to right now, but if schools are able to access.
Yeah, let me try to get it right this second. Just give me a minute. Is there another question, Corey?
So yeah, I'm going to move to questions now from the chat. So the first one is kind of a big one, but I think it's important. Is there any information about how charters co-located in DOE space will be involved in the planning for reopening? As any plans to reopen in person require accounting for social distancing in school space or campuses? So that's really the first part. If Anjali, you can provide any insight into what role charters who are co-located will have in that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And let me come back. Let me talk to my team and come back with more information, Corey. As you can imagine, there's a lot of planning happening department-wide, and our team in the charter school office have been working really closely with our colleagues and just trying to partner and be part of those conversations so that we can support you. But we're still getting clarity as to how we're going to, keep schools involved. So let me come back with that.
Great, and I'll just add that it's something that the Charter Center is very acutely aware of, and so we will continue to work with and push on DOE to make sure our co-located schools are part of the process, because we understand that it will be a lot for everyone, and we do want to make sure that charters are part of those conversations. So as Anjali said, she'll go back, but stay tuned. There will absolutely be more on this. Some other questions in the chat. I know we're at 5, so I'm just going to do a few minutes because I don't want to leave anything. Facilities work in a co-located space. As everyone knows, there are limited matching funds available. And someone is asking, does that mean any work can be done even though the work is needed for our expanding population? And Anjali, I think I know the answer, but I'll let you.
Thank you for that question. We are, so Tom Taracco and his team, they're evaluating all of the submissions and requests that have been submitted for next year. And I think I mentioned this in this forum, but we're going to be sort of limiting the work to only include essential work for next year, given our budget constraints. And so we're not going to be approving every single request as we have in the past. There's going to be a vetting process that's more that's more strict than what we've done. And our team is in the process now of reviewing those requests, and they've informed us that, you know, they're hoping to get answers to folks by the end of the year. So please keep an eye on C Weekly and your emails, you know, from that team.
Great.
I found the survey in the weekly, and I've just posted it here in the chat. That's the related services survey.
Great. Someone else is asking, has DOE developed protocols for essential workers using, I guess, in terms of health and safety? I'm assuming this is what's happening currently in the building. So either buildings that are open with rec centers, and is this something that DOE could share out?
That's a great question, Corey, and I can take that back.
Okay. And then I'll say we have a couple questions on billing. The first one is about whether or not students will be, charters will be able to bill for students who choose to remain out of state, even if they have a New York City permanent address for next year.
That's a wonderful question. We have inquired with our legal team to get more guidance on this, and I know that David is also inquiring with his team. As you know, this is a really complicated question right now, given that a lot of families have relocated and may want to participate in remote learning. So we understand it, we get it, and so hopefully more to come in the near future.
And I would just add from the advocates' perspective that this is something we absolutely will be working to make sure is done correctly, because I do think that there are not only families that have kept permanent addresses, but also families that have the intent to return after the pandemic, making sure that those families are able to stay in your schools and you will be able to receive payment for them. Last billing question, Anjali, is do you expect any changes in Misatel funding for next year?
I actually don't know, and I'm looking at David. No, I see a nod. I actually don't know. That's a good question. We haven't received our allocation for this year yet. We're waiting on that. Obviously, I don't anticipate any increases, and we're, you know, Corey, something that we've done over the last 2 years is that we've pushed really hard to get the allocation earlier, right? So we've pushed for July, you know, and we've sort of pushed for August at the very latest, so that schools can use that funding for, you know, the following school year. And so we've done that already. We've made our request and are waiting for that allocation, hopefully in July. But the minute we get more clarity in terms of the amounts by school, we'll send that out. So we're hoping sometime in July, early July. And David, if you get any clarity on whether that's going to be impacted, please let us know.
And I would echo what Anjali said. That would be my understanding as well.
And then I'll just end the last question is actually for David. Have you seen any guidance or resources out of the regents about getting credit for the remote summer school, particularly for high school students? I think the concern there is, you know, to get credit for regents classes and or usually you have to meet a certain minimum requirement, but now there's some schools have been giving incompletes to students. So are the students, if they're in summer school, whether it's with DOE or other charters, how should schools plan around that, if you have any info?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a special guest star in this segment of the webinar. And this also shows stay to the end because there's information. So we are a summer school guide is forthcoming, and it should have been out already, but we are the state, so sometimes we take a little time. And in that guide, there will be flexibilities for summer school credit through remote instruction. Although, you know, now that there are other, you know, the situation is constantly evolving. So I would just say bear with us as well. Regarding, and that's for high school students. Regarding K through 8 students, for non-high school credit, that would be pursuant to your academic policies of the school, whether or not you want to give consideration to that or not. That would be completely on you. Of course, there's a caveat that, as always, there is no state aid for instruction in July and August. And that goes for district schools as well. That's not a charter school only issue.
Got it. Yes, I think the question was specifically about the high school, which, as you said, there's something coming out. So
yeah, forthcoming.
Forthcoming. All right, I'll turn it back to you, Mika. Thanks.
Mika, you might be on mute. Well, you're definitely on mute.
I'm definitely.
You might be
mute.
trying to talk, yeah.
Try to talk, definitely. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you to all of our panelists, our authorizers today. This concludes our webinar, but of course, it does not conclude our work. Stay safe, keep up the fight for equality, justice, and peace, and we will see you on Thursday. Be well.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.